Hi, there's a number of things I want to cover in this one, so bear with me. I want to look at the London summit yesterday in Lancaster House. I think that was a very significant moment, actually. That gathering of European leaders and the Canadian Prime Minister, very important. Um, I go check out the papers today. I imagine they'll be leading on that, or perhaps he's meeting with the King. But having President Zelensky there, Keir Starmer leading it, and all those leaders in London, it was fantastic. I think it's a very powerful message. Um, and the clever thing about it is no leader was just condemning Trump, and that they're above that. They're above that. As also has been pointed out, Zelensky met an actual king yesterday, and did the king give him cheap shots and jibes about what he was wearing? No, because King Charles III has some class and dignity, and he understands when he meets a hero that what the man wears is not what's important. But just briefly on that point, those Americans who are attacking Zelensky for his attire, um, they don't seem to have the same thing to say about Elon Musk, who turned up at a cabinet meeting with a t-shirt and a baseball cap. So the double standard is just glaringly obvious. Um, Vance went on a skiing trip to Vermont, where I'm pleased to say he got a hostile welcome. Trump went on his golfing holiday. Zelensky went to the summit, and he's going back into Ukraine, which is still technically a war zone. That just shows the contrast between these people. I find it difficult to even call Trump a leader, quite honestly. The felon in the White House is not a statesman, doesn't deserve that accolade. Um, I've never felt such a low opinion of American power as I do now. Now, I want to make a few disclaimers before I go further with this because, you know, it is quite a pointed video. I'm not anti-American, and as I'm talking about this stuff, I'm very, very aware there are many, many decent Americans who are deeply embarrassed, and they do actively oppose the Trump regime. They see what it's doing to their international reputation. Seen Congressman Eric Swalwell of California I think making that contrast. And in the Democratic Party, I will remember this in 4 years. Not that I'm an American citizen, I can't vote, but I give them credit for being principled and taking a strong stand on this, i.e., backing Zelensky and condemning Trump and Vance for their obnoxious behavior. Um, let's be very, very clear what happened in that meeting. It wasn't a case of Zelensky coming in and making demands and being disrespectful. He was ambushed with falsehoods. That's what happened. Of course, he had a right to defend himself. One of the falsehoods spewed out by J.D. Vance was that Zelensky's not grateful. Well, Volodymyr Zelensky, at every opportunity he's addressed a parliament or Congress, has expressed his thanks. What do they want him to do exactly? Get down on his knees and kiss their shoes? I mean, it's ridiculous. So that's just a smear. He has expressed thanks. Um, as for Trump's claim that Ukraine started the war, Zelensky had so much dignity, he didn't even bring that up. He would have been within his rights to. He would have said, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, you have told lies about my country. But he didn't do it. And this stuff about the Oval Office is a sacred place, well, we now have a convicted criminal and mini Trump occupying it. As for Marco Rubio, complete sellout, someone who once, spoke out against dictators like Castro, he's now being the yes man for an appallingly bad president. Rubio is a disgrace. I won't, like I say, they're the guilty men. They're the people who are um, enabling Russia with this because I guarantee Russia, hawks, not just Putin, but hawks like Lavrov and Medvedev will be absolutely lapping this up. Probably China will as well. Although China's been relatively quiet recently, I think that, of course, they're going to relish Western divisions. And to be clear, I take no pleasure from Western divisions. But I do think, if anything, and I won't give Trump too much credit for this, but if anything, it will, Europe does need to wake up a little bit. If I have one criticism of our side, Europe does need to wake up a bit. We have been too overly reliant on the United States, but there's also a lot of distortion thrown out about Europe. I think the perspective of a lot of American Republicans is those ungrateful Europeans only want us when it comes to protection. Well, over 1,000 international troops from the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy, Canada laid down their lives in the Afghanistan campaign as part of the war on terror. That was a campaign, whether you agree with it or not, it was a campaign that came out of 9/11. So I think Europeans should push back a little bit against these false smears that were just, relax and European troops never show sacrifice. Remember, that was a campaign to defend the United States, to go after the Taliban who were shielding Al Qaeda. Now, this video is not about the rights and wrongs of the Afghan campaign, but I'm just making a point that this arrogant American notion that they just come in and, quote, save our asses every time is not actually true. Article 5 of NATO, the one time it was triggered was in defense of the United States. So, and another point, over 120 countries expressed support for America after 9/11. Not a single one of them demanding money back. So, the world is looking at the Trump administration as seeing everything as a business transaction. It's absolutely morally bankrupt. It has no principles, no integrity. It's all like a big business transaction to Trump, and that is what is such a failure of leadership. Um, I would love to see some sort of joint statement from former president. I don't think it will happen because there's sort of a convention that they don't criticize the successor. But surely, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden must be looking at this and feeling embarrassed. But what I'm going to be talking about, frankly, it isn't just MAGA supporting Americans. It should go back further than that. And it's this idea that America's the one indispensable nation. It's a very arrogant idea. Um, so let's look at the reality. America is the most powerful country in the world. It is. Biggest economy. It's a huge military expenditure. It's a country that has massive influence in the world, culturally, politically. There's no getting away from that, right? We could see historic parallels when Britain had hegemony in the 19th century. We had streaks of arrogance, of course we did. We saw London as the center of the universe. We were arrogant. When China had various moments of global hegemony, for example, 1,000 years ago, they were arrogant. They had the mandate of heaven. So I think wherever there's a global hegemony, there is arrogance. So I'm not saying that's unique to America, but the sheer depth of ignorance may be. And the irony about this is, in the other examples, there was no internet, there was literature was not as high, but we're living in a world where the internet provides vast amounts of information, and yet so many Americans are painfully ignorant about the outside world. I came across the so-called comedian Stephen Crowder yesterday. It came up on my newsfeed. Louder with Crowder. I'm sort of loosely familiar with him. But he had this disgusting meme sort of showing Zelensky like a little boy and looking endearingly at a photo of Biden, and it was really just mocking Zelensky. And honestly, it pissed me off because a card like Stephen Crowder would never do what Zelensky has done. You know, he has a lucrative little thing going on, being a shock jock, being just a typically thick Trump supporting American. Just it there is a sort of lucrative thing there, by being it's almost like the more dumb you are, the more ignorant you are, the more attention you'll get. And I was looking at some of the other stuff he was coming out with, attacking Canada, and it's not comedy. It's just cheap jingoism. I mean, I accept he has a lot of followers, but to me that personified the stupidity, the narrow thinking, the tunnel vision that a lot of Americans have. Literally, they don't have a passport. Now, again, this is not an attack on all Americans. I know there are decent Americans who speak out. And in my own life, on a personal basis, some of the most likable and generous people I've met have actually been American. So this is not an attack on 335 million Americans. That would be ignorant. That would be wrong. So if you're a decent American who is embarrassed by Trump, understands what Zelensky is doing, and you know, I've no problem with you. So please don't take this that way. But I have to say, even Obama was talking about we're the one nation in the world in which this could happen, talking about his election. Well, if we want to talk about firsts, Britain abolished the slave trade 30 years before the United States. In fact, that was across the empire. We abolished it in the United Kingdom 50 years before, 1807. Um, we had a woman leader years and years. Well, America's never had one, at least not in the capacity of president. They've had the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, but never been a woman president. So if we want to talk about first, Britain is ahead in that regard. In many league tables, you know, when it comes to power indexes, America's obviously high, but in other areas of human development, it's not actually at the top. Many Americans don't have access to healthcare. The world's most powerful country, and many Americans have anxiety about paying healthcare costs. You know, you have an accident, you'll get wonderful treatment, then you'll get a bill for it. If a woman goes into labor, she'll be charged for mother to baby touching. You know, literally, the touching will be charged as part of the bill. That's the United States. Nothing to boast about. The rampant problem of gun violence is nothing to boast about. And as for Vance's lecture in Europe about free speech, well, I've been very clear about my concerns in this country. You know, we do have some issues, but I don't think we should be taking lectures from J.D. Vance, whilst he is part of an administration that cozies up to Putin. And that's another thing that's so galling about the way they're treating Zelensky. They're not making demands of Putin. They're not saying, show us a peace deal to Putin. For Trump to claim that he's neutral is laughable. That's why this peace, you know, Rubio's putting this out like, oh, what's wrong? We just want peace. But that is not the situation. What they want to do is hold a knife to the Ukrainians' throat and say, we demand you accept our version of peace. A condescending way, they're saying, coming back when you want peace. Every Ukrainian you speak to will say that they want peace, including Zelensky. But at what price? This is the important thing because if you're saying to the Ukrainians, you know, peace at any price, it means essentially saying to them, you know, we expect you to live under the Russian jackboot. You know, the Ukrainians I was speaking to, yes, a young guy studying here, I asked how he feels about the situation, not so much the politics, but just generally. His parents are in the city of Kremenchuk, and he was just, he said, you know, the future's dark, we just don't know. There is a scenario that if Trump and Putin have their way, Ukraine will partition, eastern Ukraine will be fully occupied, and western Ukraine will be subject to another invasion. Unfortunately, it is a bleak future. What can Europe do? Well, I know Mark Rutte, there are a few Europeans. Mark Rutte of NATO, the former Dutch Prime Minister, actually, I think he was dead wrong to put the onus on Zelensky to go and grovel to Trump and apologise. I think Rutte's dead wrong about that. I don't know what he's playing at, quite frankly. Um, and I know Georgia Maloney sort of sees herself as a bridge between the United States and Europe. As someone pointed out, though, a bridge is not the best analogy because it means you have to cross it one way or another. So, is it the best analogy? I think both Starmer and Maloney see themselves that way, maybe Macron as well, because of historic American French relations. But you know, I think Europeans need to stop being so frankly intimidated by the United States. Collectively, we're a much bigger economy, and there's no reason why there can't be some sort of European defence um, agreement. Now, I do understand why Rutte is trying to preserve NATO. It's his job to keep NATO together. I understand that. I take no pleasure from seeing the United States the way it is. Um, but we have to accept the reality that Donald Trump cannot be trusted. I'm not suggesting we just put up a big block and say we're not going to work with the Americans. But I do think Europeans, even now, are a bit too cautious. This is fear of offending America, and I'm wondering why. I mean, what's the worst that will happen? Trump will threaten tariffs. He'll let off a few angry tweets. He may even impose tariffs. But, collectively, I just think Europe can step up. Um, and perhaps that's one good thing that's coming out of all of this. But body language was so palpable. President Zelensky, when he came to London, he met the King, he met Starmer, he met all those other leaders. He looked so much more comfortable. And why wouldn't he? He's among friends. Unfortunately, in the Oval Office, it's like he was in the lion's den being set up by Putin's leading propagandists. I am so disgusted by Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Marco Rubio. They're a disgrace. And MAGA supporting Americans who think this is strength are so deluded. They need to get out of their bubble and see how the rest of the world sees this. It's true that there are quite a lot of people in countries in Africa and Asia that are deeply misinformed about this because Russian propaganda still permeates quite strongly there. What I would respectfully say to them is don't make a fool of yourself by backing Russia because you can be absolutely sure Putin doesn't care about you. And the gaslighting to blame the country that is invaded for wanting to start World War III. I challenge anyone. If your country was invaded, how would you feel? I challenge Marco Rubio. If the United States of America was invaded, if millions of Americans were displaced, American POWs tortured, American women raped, thousands of young American servicemen killed on the front lines, a third party swoops in, thousands of American children kidnapped, a third party sweeps in, says, you started this, now we demand you give us a peace offer, which by the way involves your enemy getting um, a huge say in this. It's utterly preposterous. That is an example of the arrogance of American exceptionalism that Rubio thinks he can play God with the Ukrainians. He thinks him and Trump and Vance, I think they could just say, come back when you're ready. The way they treat Zelensky was disgusting. There will be some, even in Ukraine, who think maybe it was wrong of Zelensky to be so assertive. There will even be some Ukrainians who think maybe he should have just played Trump's game. I'm not sure about that because I don't. I mean, there is still American support going to Ukraine, what's left over from the Biden administration, but Trump's a bully and it's a bullying administration, and I just don't know if that's necessarily the best way to go forward because the whole thing where Trump was blackmailing Zelensky over rare earth materials, it just shows you where Trump is. It's so disgusting. And for any MAGA Republican to think that is leadership, they're deluded. Also, what Zelensky mentioned about the ocean, this idea that why should Americans care? Ukraine's thousands of miles away. Well, there's a way to look at that. Even if you don't want to care about Ukraine, an assertive Russia, an emboldened Russia, do you seriously think it will want to live harmoniously with the United States? What Putin is doing is looking at Trump as a weakened, embarrassed leader who he can take advantage of. In the long run, it won't help America. Zelensky was right about that. So even if you want to disregard Ukraine, even if you want to put aside all the moral issues, say, why should we care? Um, Americans took that attitude until December 1941, and they very much had to care. That's another point about American exceptionalism. I probably should have said this earlier in the video, but there's this attitude that just because America was involved in both world wars, it single-handedly won it. The fact of the matter is, World War II in Europe broke out in September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Throughout the rest of that year, the whole of 1940 and most of 1941, the United Kingdom was the one major Western power in Europe standing alone. Now, when I say standing alone, I don't mean any disrespect to the courageous resistance movement. I'm talking about a major government in that sense. There were, of course, courageous resistance movements, and we had Czech and Polish airmen who laid down their lives in the Battle of Britain. I'm very aware of that. So it's not meant to be like a jingle, oh, we were alone in that sense. But when Americans talk about we came in and saved your asses, the only reason they came into World War II was Pearl Harbor. Most Americans didn't want to be involved. Roosevelt did try, but Congress kept putting up blocks to it. It's the same thing with World War One. One of the main reasons America got involved with that was the German U-boat attacks on American shipping. This is not at all to disrespect those many young Americans who are lying in European cemeteries, laid down their lives. I've nothing but respect for them. But the arrogance of American exceptionalism is just misplaced. I mean, 80,000 Frenchmen died before even the British Expeditionary Force came into World War One. When I hear Americans talk about, I'm not even going to repeat the sort of smears they talk about the French, but, it just, there is so much ignorance coming from the United States on history. It's infuriating. We came in and saved your asses. No, you're a big help. But the idea that America came in and, it's just preposterous. I'm not downplaying the American role, by the way. It was very important, particularly in World War One. It's definitely helped the Allies push the final offensives. Britain and France were exhausted, so I acknowledge that. But this idea, particularly regarding World War Two, we came in and saved our asses. It's just so arrogant. Um, and as for Russia, it's true they had massive, massive casualties, but part of that was Stalin's disregard for human life and the very questionable generalship of a lot of the Russian commanders. Let's not forget Russia invaded Poland shortly after Germany did, and everything Russia done was with self-interest. So they certainly weren't intervening to help liberate countries like Poland. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I just feel this country naturally needs to be much, much closer to our European neighbours at this point. I'm not saying that we totally disconnect from the United States, but I honestly think, I mean, I've signed a petition last night against Trump's visit. I don't think in these situations, in this context, we should be rolling out the red carpet for that man. Probably it will go ahead. Starmer's putting his foot down on that. Starmer's trying to play it both ways. On one hand, I respect what he's done with Zelensky. I respect his leadership at the Lancaster House Summit, but I think he's wrong to so aggressively push for Trump's visit. Again, it's this idea that we really, really need it. Well, that's where Brexit's left us. Maybe, unfortunately, we do on some level, because Brexit has left us overly dependent outside the EU. We need to work with the EU, we need to work with the Commonwealth. This idea that we must pander to America. Why? I think Lindsay Hoyle, as Speaker, should block Trump entering the Commons. There is absolutely no reason why he should. It's not actually mandatory. I mean, I guarantee when Trump comes here, he will be spectacularly unpopular. George W. Bush wasn't popular, but I think this is on another level. Um, so it's American leadership is gone. America is the most powerful country in the world, but it's not leading the free world. It really isn't. I'd say right now, I call Volodymyr Zelensky the leader of the free world, and I'd say geographically Europe is stepping up, and it absolutely should, along with Canada and other partners such as Japan, South Korea. Um, but we are really seeing a radical shift here from the post-war situation, thanks to Donald Trump. I do think this has been a very, very significant week. History will play out in an interesting way. Um, but yeah, Europe does need to step up. The photo ops are great, but it needs to be followed up with decisive action as well. The only way this war in Ukraine will end is when Russia withdraws. That's a peace plan. In fact, I think one last thing I'll say. I know the Europeans are drafting this thing with Zelensky for a peace plan to bring to Trump. Well, Trump can't rationally claim that Zelensky doesn't want peace if a peace plan comes to him, even if it's saying, my peace plan is Russia should get the hell out of my country. Zelensky wants peace. This gaslighting is grotesque.